Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host Andy.
I'm
I'm
your
your
other
co-host.
co-host, Mark.
Get out of here, Mark. Get out of here, Mark. I'm your other co-host, Josh.
Did I just
This
see
is
somebody rise who wasn't there before?
Yeah, I had to show up for Evil Dead.
That was the most WWE entrance ever. You just busted in like Stone Cold. Like you just needed your own entrance music. Oh my God, it's Mark.
I had to.
I love it.
It was Evil Dead. Evil Dead will always be, unless they do something just completely off the wall and stupid. Evil Dead Rise was fucking awesome. And Evil Dead is like my all-time favorite horror franchise, with Halloween being my favorite slasher franchise. But as far as horror goes, Evil Dead is it for me.
I I have a lot of thoughts about this movie, and like as we've expressed over the last few episodes, Evil Dead is a series that I do not think will ever deliver a bad entry because you have Sam Raimi and
Bruce
Bruce
Campbell.
Campbell at the helm of these things, like deciding who's going to do it. And I think much like 2013 with Freddie, I don't know how you say his name, Freddie Alves, but the gentleman that wrote and directed that, like being like a complete unknown, and then giving Lee Cronin, who's also like essentially a complete unknown amongst a cast of unknowns, uh, a new setting. I think that this movie was a wild ride, and if we have to wait another 10 years before it, like I'm 100% down for it because the Evil Dead doing the series is like the Evil Dead has like really risen in the ranks of like horror franchises for me.
Yeah, I gotta say the same. Going through this movie exceeded my expectations. I'm always for a franchise kind of keeping its elements but throwing in a new setting or just something, that they haven't really done before. So I was way into this, and you are right, Josh. I didn't really think about it till you just said it, but I love how the series has kind of turned into Sam Raimi kind of picking these young filmmakers who he kind of sees potential in and giving them the chance to run with something as opposed to just, always jumping in himself. I think that's like a great new avenue for this franchise to go. And yeah, kind of similar to why I love Chucky so much, having these two guys as kind of like a singular kind of like head figure of this franchise and then shepherding it through is kind of same with Chucky and Don Mancini. So yeah, it's fantastic. But yeah, I had a great time watching this movie yesterday at the theaters.
Well, they did such a good job with the remake. It's almost a blueprint on how to do a remake properly. They didn't try to recast any of the original characters. They didn't try to rehash any of the jokes or kills or really anything. They kept the basic story there and a whole lot of nods to the original movies in the remake. And they did the same thing with this one. It's it's a sequel. So so my thought, seeing all the trailers up to it, I was thinking from the style of a lot of stuff they were showing, it may be a prequel to the remake. I was wrong, and I'm good with that because it was awesome. But I like the direction they've taken. That it's I think it's in the same universe as the remake, but it's dealing with a different demon, Deadites, and a different Necronomicon.
All right, so way
I'm
to jump
screwing
into
up spoilers
way
already.
to jump into spoilers low Soho. So I think it's like all fair to say that we all like genuinely at least liked this movie. Maybe not loved, but genuinely liked, right?
Yeah. I mean,
So,
we'll get into it. I'll have some things to say, but I did like it a lot, and I'd highly recommend it.
well, my
Yeah,
thing was I was texting Josh, I think yesterday on the way to. I was like, dude, I'm worried I'm too hyped for this movie and just gonna end up hating it. And it's got like was it Princess Oslo from Vikings is the mother.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen
I'll take your word
Vikings.
for it. I'm
Hey,
not
I
a
don't think
Yeah.
Vikings
I
guy.
haven't seen anybody in this cast anywhere before this
No,
movie.
same, same.
Yeah, she was major character, one of the main characters in Vikings in like season 2 or 3, and I think pretty much till the end. I didn't see season like 5.
Queen Aslock,
Yeah.
Princess. She is Alyssa Sutherland. Let's go ahead and jump into this. This is, if you guys haven't seen Evil Dead Rise, because Mark doesn't know how to not do spoilers for a movie that he's excited about. At least I could contain myself last year when we did Hellraiser. But anyways, that aside, this is your official spoiler warning. So if you guys haven't seen Evil Dead Rise, go check it out. Pause, download, subscribe to the podcast, come back and join the conversation. It is now in effect. So let's jump into this, gentlemen. Mark, you jumped into something that like I really wanted to jump into like really early on, was how this movie in particularly handles a lot of what has come before it. I think this, if I had to like talk about like the Evil Dead, because we've established it by this point that like every entry into the Evil Dead franchise is something completely different. Everything feels different. I would say that this film kind of accompanies the entire franchise tone. There are parts that I genuinely laughed at. There are parts that genuinely got me afraid, and then there are genuinely parts that are absolutely terrifying. And I think that this is like the perfect amalgamation of all the tones that we've seen thus far, even having that like little touch to Army of Darkness in the 13th century.
Oh, there were lots of nods to the original movies in this one. They were all over the place. But 1 and 2, you were saying that each movie kind of had its own feel. 1 and 2 is essentially one movie if you watch it properly. So there is that. And I think we've talked about that before on here. But there were just so many nods to the series with certain things that were done, and the way they do some of the kills were very reminiscent of the original movies and even the remake itself. But I think it's cool that they make reference in Army of Darkness. They actually show you some of the Necronomicon sitting on a platform. Yeah. And there were 3 in the graveyard when he mispronounces the words and causes the shitstorm in Army of Darkness. But that was what I liked in this one, that instead of it being the Necronomicon from the remake or from the Evil Dead previously, it's dealing with a whole new Necronomicon, a demon that seems to be more of a force than the previous one was.
Well, so Lee Cronin, the writer director behind this film, has said that he likens that there is the original Sam Raimi trilogy, Evil Dead 1, 2, and Army of Darkness. There is the Evil Dead 2013, then you have Evil Dead Rise. And it is a callback to that sequence where Ash is finding the Necronomicons in Army of Darkness, and there's 3 different variations of it. The fact that when Danny finds this one looks completely different, but Cronin has also gone on record in saying that that's what he kind of akins that you know, Alvarez had his, Raimi had his, I have mine, so that every entry you're doing could open up the fact that these are taking place within the same universe, but also at the same time they're taking place in different universes.
Yeah, they're keeping it very vague, so you can interpret it how you want.
Yeah, and I kind of like it because it likens back to the original, where like lore was never really what they were too worried about, and continuity wasn't really what they were worried about either when they made these movies. In the first 3, I mean, there's ways to connect them for sure, but like when they came out, even the way Evil Dead 2 ends to the way 3 starts, it's like it doesn't really line up 100%. You kind of have to make leaps of imagination. So I don't really mind that they're keeping it vague as well.
So
Hold
this
on,
is
I think you're getting like, I just want to throw this intro in there. I think it's gonna be a deja vu for us, Andy, where you remember when Cage connected all of the Friday the Nightmare on Elm Street movies for us.
Yeah.
I think Mark's getting ready to connect everything for the Evil Dead franchise.
I've been watching this series very long, for many, many years, the better part of 3 decades at this point. So Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi are both on record that the issues with the connection between the stories, where they have little differences between the opening of 2 and the end of 1, and differences between Army of Darkness and 2, was because the rights to the movies kept changing hands. So they had to do little stupid things. So they altered it. It was just him and his girlfriend went to the cabin in Evil Dead 2, but the story was pretty much the same. If you cut like the first 10 or 15 minutes to the scene where he goes flying through the woods and hits the tree getting possessed, it picks up directly off the end of 1. And they did it that way on purpose. So it's one movie and they could continue the story. But if you don't know that, yeah, you've got the viewpoint that you do, that they keep changing things, where they did just enough to keep from getting in trouble for rights, but they let you know, hey, you have to pick it up at this spot on the next movie to make everything make sense and be coherent. So that's why between 1 and 2, the story is altered for the backstory of what happened in 1, is because of the rights changing hands. But if you pick it up from that scene where he goes flying through the woods and just watch it immediately after 1, it's just one movie. It's like 2.5 hour Evil Dead.
Yeah, for sure. I knew all that as well, but I kind of feel like even when it comes to the TV, I got to rewatch Ash vs. Evil Dead in terms of the lore, because I don't really remember the level of that, but I feel like that had a lot of winks and nods as well. But all that was my point to just saying that I like the fact that each time we're getting a new entry, it feels it has the same tonal tie to everything, but in a way, if you wanted to, as a regular fan, you could just watch them as their own entries, or you can tie them in. It kind of has a foot in both playgrounds. You have lore you can play with, or you can just kind of jump in each entry and just watch it as their own movie.
Yeah, the way they've been loose with some of the backstory with the Necronomicons and with how things have gone down with Ash has left it open for interpretation to do these movies. So they still fit, but they're not quite the same, but they still fit. And they, like you said, they can all be in the same universe, or they may be all separate time frames or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm just, me personally, I'm not the biggest lore guy, so I'm not too, I haven't really thought about it that much. But I love the visual nods. Like, if we're gonna talk about Evil Dead Rise, her getting possessed in the elevator with the cable wires, I love that looked just like the trees grabbing the women in the other movies.
Yeah.
So it's like the evil's the same no matter where it is, but it'll use the environment in which it's possessed in. So like, I don't know, I like that. I thought was like a really cool touch, and I thought this movie was full of stuff like that.
Yeah, it was a little bit easier to swallow that particular scene because it's not as graphic as the original or the remake, but it still has that nod. It still has that feel to where you're like, oh, like I understand what's going on here. And like we talked about, the episodes are releasing backwards, but in the remake episode, we did talk about like how just grody and like to the wall like Alvarez went with that film, to where like it feels like an absolute like perfect remake, but also at the same time like it's just absolutely like down and dirty, like the way it needs to be with its subject matter, but also it's like it's not afraid to like make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, it pretty much was what they wanted the original one to be, but didn't have the ability to do at the time.
So I want to ask you guys, since we're gonna start like directly at the beginning, how did you guys feel about the opening sequence at the cabin? Uh,
In the moment, I definitely I didn't hate it. I was watching it. I thought it had some cool kills, and I loved her reading the book. It was a nice callback to the playing card thing.
mhm,
I liked it a lot, but having watched the whole movie, it did narratively. I thought it was going to tie in a little bit more. The fact that it was just like some random people, you know what I mean? Like it kind of messed with me the whole movie because I was waiting for them to be like, how is it going
same.
to tie back to that? And then it barely did. Like it did, but it did nothing to do with the characters that were in the movie. So overall, I don't know. I'm not crazy about it, but as a scene in and of itself, I was into it. Like I liked the drone fake out. I liked yeah, so I liked the scalp rip. Like they had some good kills. So as a scene, I liked it. As a script with 3 acts, I don't really understand what it had to do with the rest of the movie, but that's me.
Well,
Yeah.
it was a nod of what was coming. The fact that they've said it's been left in this manner to keep it open for more, which we all know that means if it's a flop, we'll have to wait another decade for the next one. If it's great, we'll have to wait 2 or 3 years for the next one.
It is, yeah,
But
because
it also goes to what they were playing on one of the records with the priest talking, that this is a different entity and set of deadites than were dealt with previously. Because he talks about, I burned them and they just laughed. I cut them to pieces and it didn't work. They kept coming. Where previously dealing with deadites, those were like two of the main ways to kill them: dismemberment, fire, and burying them alive were the ways to take them out. And none of it was working in this. They just kept moving forward and kept coming. And that plays into the beginning, because the end of the movie leads into what happened at the beginning of the movie. So they were showing you how bad this demon really was compared to the one in the previous Evil Dead iterations.
See, I get that and I understand that. I feel like it's definitely one of I'm in Andy's camp. Like I definitely think that there are cool moments that exist within it, but from like a narrative perspective, you honestly could have like had it as a mid-credit scene and like left that door open. And I know that like there's only ever been one post-credit scene in this entire franchise, and that was the Ash Groovy from the remake. Because eventually, like the original plan was, if you guys didn't know, was to cross over Mia and Ash to kind of have them do their own like Deadite adventure, and that never ended up happening because the movie just didn't have, I guess, favorable box office returns, or they just didn't have a good story. Um,
Yeah, it didn't get the returns they wanted. It
Well,
might have actually been considered a flop, if I remember right.
Well, so here's the thing is that like anytime you cross over franchises, and like Andy can attest to this, is that um the I don't remember the author's names, but there's a book called Taking Shape 2, which is like an exploration of like all these like unmade Halloween movies. And at one point there were multiple takes to do a Hellraiser Halloween crossover. Didn't end up happening. There
Yeah.
were so many crossover attempts before that. The authors that wrote that book also did a book called Slash the Titans, where there were, I think there's like 19 to 25 different takes to do Freddy versus Jason. So horror crossovers, I think it's just a bad. I think it's just kind of like a curse around it, because it seems like for every one that they try to attempt to do, we never see. Um, so like I think that's part of the reason why we never saw it, but I think it also might have been returns. But this opening one, like the scalping, I thought was great. The drone fake out, like Andy said, but like just from a narrative perspective, it just didn't need to be here, honestly.
Yeah, like I totally get the idea of showing that the evil is stronger than we've ever seen and is still alive, but I would have liked that there was some connection between these characters other than she happened to also live in that apartment building. It just underwhelmed me a little bit, like where I was just
Which
like, is this going to be like, I don't know, I couldn't really, but it didn't ruin anything for me. It was more just, if I'm going to be honest, like it's one of the small criticisms I had.
Yeah,
So
so like
was it
here's
was
the
it
thing
more
that like hold on. Let me just get this out. So like here's the thing though, is that we meet multiple people in the building. And the older gentleman, Mr. Fonda, establishes that like next to nobody lives there because they're getting ready to like demolish the high rise. You could have had her in like one or two of those scenes to like make the connectivity tissue a little bit better.
Yeah, and is it more of the placement of that scene or the fact that it exists? Like, would you still kind of be like, with it if it had been at the end? Or is it yeah, you get what I'm saying. Is it more of the placement of the scene or the scene itself?
Yeah, I think it might be the placement a little bit where for me it's like it just seemed like they wanted some opening kills and some opening excitement. And if it
Yeah.
wasn't there, then it would have been too slow of a build up in the beginning. And so like, and tons and tons of movies do this. So it's not I'm not like mad at the movie, but it just seems like a little bit of a cheap screenwriting trick where you're like, let's upfront. It's like when you watch a movie and it starts off in like the middle of a gunfight, and then it's like, how did we get here? And then you go 3 weeks earlier. It's just kind of a little cheap way, but I'm not mad at it. I don't think and this movie didn't invent it, and it's
Yeah. I'm also like almost curious if like, like alternatively opening, you could have like had them making the vinyls with the priests and kind of like the exploration of that, and then like being like 100 years later kind of thing, and like tie everything. I think there are things that I love about the opening. Like I said, the gags I think are great, but it's just the connectivity and like how it feeds into the larger narrative that I'm like, I don't like this. I think this is just kind of a crowd pleasing moment, and it doesn't need to be.
I think they were trying to follow the formula of the remake, because the remake is the only one they open with kills like that.
Well, I mean, that's also like a modern day thing too, right? So like when you go back and you watch some of these movies from like the 80s, not just Evil Dead, but Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or any like 80s film, you're opening up and it's slower. Like you're gonna get a recap of what happened, the events, the previous film. It's a sequel,
Right.
but that's more or less because like VHSs and like they just weren't readily available as they are today in physical media or streaming. So that I get, but like the most part, like Friday the 13th, I think is a great example. Once you kind of do that recap, you jump right back into the story, and I don't feel like that works for this story they're telling here.
I actually I just have a quick theory that I think what
Mhm.
they might be going for. I wonder if it was done more as like a fake out, because I personally didn't watch any trailers for this. I just don't
Me
like to
neither.
watch trailers for movies that I know I'm gonna see. So other than our conversation last week about Evil Dead 2013, when we talked about this, and someone mentioned that it was about a mother. That was the first time I even heard that. So I didn't know the setting or the plot. I just knew it was an Evil Dead movie. So having it start at the cabin did fake me out a little bit, where I was like, okay, here's the new cabin. It's Evil Dead. Of course, we're going to be in a cabin. And then when it cut to a Los Angeles apartment building, it did throw me off a little bit. So maybe I'm being a little harsh on it. So maybe it was for the few people who don't watch trailers. Maybe it was just kind of be like, hey, look, it's the same old Evil Dead. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, it's not. We're actually going to go into the city with this one. You
See,
know what I
I
mean?
knew, yeah, so I knew that like I didn't watch trailers anyways, but like when we did the film festival last week, there is a ginormous Evil Dead Rise poster in their lobby. And so like I knew it wasn't the cabin because like the tagline of this is like mommy loves you to death or mommy's with the maggots now. And like all of everything had been about like the mother character in Alyssa Sullivan, is that her name? Alyssa
Southern,
Sutherland.
yeah.
So it had been about her character. So like even when it opens up on Lily Sullivan's character Beth in the doing the pregnancy test, like I knew that there was like still more coming. I knew it didn't like revolve around her character until we met Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
So, real quick, how familiar were y'all with the Evil Dead franchise as a whole before doing this podcast series?
Oh, Oh, go on.
I was gonna say, go ahead, Andy.
Oh, I've actually been watching them since I was a teenager, but
Okay, like me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I saw Evil Dead 2013 in theaters. I watched Ash vs. Evil Dead every week on Stars. It was yeah. So I've
And
been there.
as I've established throughout the series, is like Evil Dead was a series I came to be familiar with during lockdown. So this is still a newer series to me.
Okay.
But like
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen them enough times to like understand and know the basis of this series and like what makes it tick.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
So you had mentioned the crossing Ash with having him cross over into Mia's world, or Mia crossing over into Ash's, one or the other. They were supposed to meet up, was the original plan. Mm-hmm. And that whole ability to do so was actually introduced in Army of Darkness and in the Ash vs. the Evil Dead series. Yeah. So that would have, I don't think, because it just came to mind, so I'm backtracking a little bit. I don't think they would have had the rights issues or trouble that they had with like Freddy versus Jason, because all the rights were under the same people and being written and supervised by the same people, where Freddy versus Jason was under two different companies having to work together.
Well, I mean, yeah, I feel like we've beat that horse to death.
Yeah, and the way they've done this movie, which leads me to this, the way they've done this movie and leading it out to this one deadite out in the middle of the woods right now, they've actually opened it up in a manner to, one, have the deadites basically start invading the world and spreading, and two, to keep that story as a possibility to have Mia and Ash show up in this possible alternate universe or alternate location or whatever it is.
Here is what I need in terms of a crossover series from the Evil Dead. Leatherface. Like this movie, this series is already like Deadites versus like chainsaw wielding people. Like, just give me the family versus Evil Dead, like the Deadites. I'm here for it.
All the characters need chainsaw training, so they go and find Leatherface, and he like trains them out in a farm somewhere.
I'm still a fan of my theory that Deathgasm is part of this universe as well.
I mean, you're probably not wrong. Go check out our Deathgasm episode with Leo and Tom. It's a great episode.
I'm done ranting. Go ahead.
I think also like the things that like I think this movie does, like it pays homage, as we've already kind of mentioned, but it does enough differently. This is the first film in the franchise that's also set outside of a cabin in the woods, or in Army of Darkness's case, the medieval times. This is like the, setting it in like one place, and especially something as big as a high rise. I really loved, but also this is the first time too that we've seen like we've seen like families, but you've never seen like a mother kind of be possessed by the spirit in this one. So like I think that there's enough differently in this one that I really loved.
It's also the first one where the lead Deadite is one of the main characters.
That's true. Also, I want to throw this out there.
Wasn't Mia the lead Deadite in 2013?
She is.
Kind of.
Yeah.
She's possessed and becomes depossessed and becomes the hero. This one doesn't.
Yeah,
She's
True.
the Deadite
Yeah.
is almost a co-star in this one,
yeah.
as opposed to just a background character or story development.
Yeah, so the one of the things that like I also want to like throw like in terms of like to add to our nod conversation is the sequence where Casey gets tricked by Ellie to let her back in. And so she starts to unlock it and then you see the hand through the door. Uh it's obviously it's switched, but it's a great callback to the girl in the basement from the first two Evil Deads.
Or the
Yeah,
eyeball scene.
yeah, the
Yeah.
eyeball scene was right there. But yeah, I liked how like her being locked outside was similar to the cellar. It was like a apartment version of locking someone in the cellar. But speaking to like what they did with the plot with the family, I just thought that was a really strong move because it was not only is it like it's just easier emotionally to tie to a family than it is to a group of friends. Like with a group of
Yeah.
friends, you really have to write it in a way where I believe that they love each other. So like with a family, it's a little more built in. And then also just like they could have easily went the safe route where it's like the oldest kid gets possessed and then the story is about the mother saving her other kids. But by fact like going for the mother and then also like not being afraid to kill these kids, it just threw it on a level of unpredictability for me where I was just like, oh, this doesn't seem like anyone's safe. And I thought that was a smart move. I felt like there was a lot of easy ways you could do this where the kids never really get hurt. You know, it's all about a mom coming to her strengths. But I thought they really
And
swung for the fences and took risks.
and they did, because they did something else you don't see often in horror, is the actual violent deaths of kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I really, because I never know. I'm like, this could just like they could just have their gloves on and just play it safe. But this movie did not. And by the end, I was pretty shocked.
And I think that's why the team that did the remake in this one is doing so well with it, is because we have the formula from the originals. We're not recreating Ash and his universe. We're doing it our way, and screw the formulas for horror. We're doing it the way we want to do it. And they're really pushing what's been done in horror because of it.
I think this movie like retains like the Evil Dead formula to an extent, but I think like as Andy's saying, like there's enough that's different. Like the emotions feel higher, like you're saying, Mark, like the fact that kids legitimately die in this and they're like super violent deaths too. Like it's not just like, oh, we're just recreating that scene from Pet Cemetery where a kid gets run over by an 18-wheeler. No, this is
No.
like super like violent. You're gonna bleed out for a while kind of deaths.
And even the sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Even the age of the youngest daughter, I feel like that was pretty bold to make her that young. Like she was at an age where, you know, like it's so scarring to have gone through that, where they could have easily made her like 10 or 12 just to soften the blow. But they were like, nope, she's, I don't know, was she in kindergarten? I couldn't even tell how old that kid was supposed to be.
She's probably like 6 or 7.
Yeah, like really
Yeah.
young.
And
Yeah,
like to the fact to like also make her the final girl out of the 3 kids was like also a really bold decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was stuff about the other two that just, they weren't the best kids in the world.
Well,
So
it's not that, and like I speak this from like not someone that has like experienced a parents being separated or divorced. My parents have definitely had their ups and downs in their like 30 plus years of marriage, but like from being friends with people that have been divorced, like you're a teenager, like you're you're going through something that A, you don't understand, B, if you do think you understand, somehow it's your fault. And so I think that, you know, these kids had healthy outlets. I don't think they're bad kids whatsoever. Like they're in the process of experiencing this trauma because their sense of normalcy has been broken down. So, you know, you have Danny that's kind of going the route of you know, music and the creative arts, and then flip it over to Bridget, and she has a lot of, you know, she's taken a lot of that stuff into you know, humanitarianism and trying to make a better a difference in the world. And I think that they juxtapose these things to showcase that like they're not dealing with it properly. And so I think it like also the fact that they have this trauma that's in their life that's it's unspoken about at this time, because when Beth asks and presents the cup, says, "This is for your dad," like everyone kind of shuts down, right? And then on the flip side of that, you also have these kids that are in a position where they can't talk about it, but also at the same time, like they haven't dealt with it because they can't talk about it. So they're trying to find creative outlets that are healthy, but I think that they also miss the mark, that like this film showcases the importance of like not necessarily running away from your problems, because in the end, like you're presented with a new set of problems. Maybe not as extreme as Deadites, but it is, you are presented with new a new set of problems if you choose to run away from your current problems.
I don't think it's a matter of that they couldn't deal with them or couldn't talk about it. I think it's that they just didn't. It was more of a case of this happened. It was new. It had just happened within the last couple months, and they just weren't dealing with it, as opposed to couldn't dealing with it.
That's what,
And
yeah, that's what I
then,
meant. Like that they
yeah,
weren't dealing with it.
and
Because like
then they were having to also deal with being essentially evicted as well, because of
yeah,
how the building was supposed to be demolished. So it was
yeah.
everything all at once.
So you kind of have this like this whirlwind of everything just kind of going wrong for them. Like, my I don't want to like say like there have been times where like it felt like as a teenager my parents came close to divorce, and like again, like I didn't know how to deal with it. So it's like the just even like the teasing of like this might not be normal for you moving forward. So you're now like you're trying to have like you're trying to make sense of a new semblance of normalcy.
Oh, I thought you were going to continue with that. Yeah, my parents have been together since like the 70s. At this point, they're it's death at this point. So I don't
Yeah,
ever have to deal with that, but I have been through a divorce with a kid involved, and I think at one time she might have felt like it was her fault. But the more time went on, she kind of saw both of us and realized that it wasn't her fault.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think it
I'll keep
also
out of details on that, but it's when they're young, and parents tend to focus more on the kids than each other. I think that's part of what makes it easy for a kid to think it's their fault when something like that happens.
yeah. And like I also like again, I've had a lot of friends that have like gone through divorce. I remember growing up, like my best friend, she was like she was probably like 8 or 9 when her parents got divorced, and like so we talked for hours about it, and she just kind of consoled me and being like, I don't understand, like it's my fault, blah blah blah. And then coming to realize like as an adult, like you realize like how hard relationships actually are. Um, and that's the thing also I think that comes with growing up as well.
yeah. I think that's totally right. I also, my parents are also together, so I didn't have a firsthand relation to it in the movie, but it it did work on just helping me feel for these kids, where it's like you did just lose your dad in a 6 month period. It's like someone you trusted with every part of your being kind of abandoned you and betrayed you, and then now the same thing's happening with your mother, and it just like it added to the horror of this movie, where I felt it more than I ever felt it in another movie, when I said like it is like a group of friends. Yes, it's obviously tragic, but the family element and that level of trust between a parent and a kid being severed like really made this movie work for me, just on a story level.
Yeah, I agree. Like everything, the emotions of this just feel like really heightens. Like I connected to these characters really deeply, just because of, you know, I really like connected to Beth as a character, which I know we haven't gotten into her, because like there are definite times where like I have felt like a screw up because I don't live up to everyone's expectations, and that's kind of one of the things that I really liked about her mental health journey, is that like she's getting ready to be a mom, but also at the same time like she's having to kind of face realities that like it's okay not to live up to everyone's expectations. And I think you just need to like have somebody tell you that it's okay to be yourself. It's okay not to live up to the expectations of others. That's what I really liked about the Beth and Ellie like sister dynamic, is that Ellie kind of seemed to be the voice of reason that was always telling her and like reaffirming that it's okay to like mess up. It's okay to kind of be your own individual person and not necessarily have to live up to these expectations that either, you set up for yourself that are unfair or that everyone else sets up for you.
Here's an interesting take on the movie for you. Not sure how you'll feel about this, but it's an interesting comparison to mothers in general. The healthy motherly will do anything for my kids, and the aunt in this case, against some mothers who are abusive and just evil. So you've got a healthy mother relationship versus an unhealthy one.
So I want to just say that, like, and I don't know how you guys feel about it. I don't have kids. I've gone on record. I don't want kids. I don't feel qualified to kind of like dissect like the parental relationship in here because I've never gone through it. I don't know how hard it is, and I don't want to try and be like a guy that is. I've seen so many movies and so many documentaries, and I'm qualified to talk about this. That's just not me. So,
but you see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, like, but to quote South Park, I'm out on this one.
I just thought that was an interesting take that you could see in the way the movie played out.
What I think is really interesting too is the way that ultimately the horror of this builds out. And so I'm curious how you guys feel about this. So I think we've all seen Rob Zombie movies to some degree.
I think the only one I haven't seen is the Salem one.
Okay. So then this one was not ruined for you because the plot of this movie is literally Lords of Salem.
I haven't seen it.
All right, so Lords of Salem is just a quick backstory. Lords of Salem, Rob Zombie's wife plays a DJ, and she gets gifted this mysterious record that ties into her ancestral past that ends up like connecting her to an ancient evil. And so when they started doing like the records with like Danny and like this version of the Book of the Dead, like I was just like, oh, we're going that route. Okay.
I mean,
cool.
To me, it was just we're using the Evil Dead formula. Somebody stumbles upon the Necronomicon somewhere and shit hits the fan. Because
that's absolutely fine.
Even in the original, they find the Necronomicon and tapes.
That's absolutely fine. Like for me, like I just literally watched Lords of Salem like 2 weeks ago to be on like another podcast. And so like the moment that he finds the vinyls in the vault, I was like, those are the recordings. Like 100%.
But if you go that route, Lords of Salem would have been the plot to the original Evil Deads.
I mean, that's fine. That is absolutely fine. Like, look again, dude. Like to go back to like the ancient saying, "There's nothing new under the sun." So,
yeah, I just thought as the screenwriters needing a way to have the reading scene and making it make sense with modern technology. So I think the main reason the kid was into music, so it would make sense that somebody would have a record player. Like you'd have to at least be into vinyls at this point in life to have one. Like not everyone has one, and they're not going to find MP3s. So you know what I'm saying. Yeah, I know plenty of people do. What I'm saying, the average household, I feel like not everyone has record playing technology on the ready to go.
Yeah, I also feel like you have to like love like physical media to some extent, especially in this like world of streaming that we're on nowadays. Like you could pay like $10 and stream everything on Spotify or Apple Music, and you have to be like a really like fluent like lover of the craft to pick up vinyl.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who like physical media. The only reason I don't have a record player right now, one, is because of moving, and two, I've never had the space to collect records and vinyl.
Yeah, same. Like I love music, but the money alone is just it's so much to just get into to really have a substantial collection.
I have I think I have like less than 10 records, and like 90% of them are like soundtracks and scores. So I'm just kind of like, like I'm only gonna buy CDs that are like vinyls that like I really like.
And see, for me, it would be going to a record shop and coming back with 4 or 5 vinyls at a time, minimum.
Yeah, that's like Brandon. Every time he goes like shopping, it's like 3 to 5 every time he goes. Like he'll send me texts and be like, I went record shopping today. And I picked up like the all 5 of these. And I'm just like, geez, dude, I wish I had that kind of money, man. Cause like anyways, back to Evil Dead Rise.
It's awesome. That's all it boils down to. And
Did
the
you-
cheese. So, okay, the cheese grater scene,
Oof.
it made you cringe, but I really thought it was going to be more than it was, and wanted it to be more than it was.
Same, because there's like, so I haven't followed any of the trailers for this, so like I didn't know anything. I knew that like because I follow, I think it's Bright Rags on Instagram, they have a shirt that is like the cheese grater and it says Evil Dead Rise.
Is it Fright Rag that made the cheese grater t-shirt?
It's one of those two, because there's 3 or 4 that did Evil Dead Rise shirts. So I think it's Fright Rags is one of them. So like I knew there was a cheese grater to some extent, but I was like waiting for them to be like so much more. Like I was really hoping that like Beth was gonna take it to Bridget after she turned, or that like when they discovered Bridget like in the corner, like she was gonna be like grating away her skin, and not to the degree where it was just like Beth was trying to escape. And
well, guys, what is a wood chipper if not a giant cheese grater? If they didn't set it up and pay it off, I don't know what to say.
Yeah,
I mean,
this is facts.
I think the only thing that would have topped it would be if Bridget turned around and was cheese gratering the side of her face.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That would have been the only thing to really top it. But
I kind of like the self-mutilation with the drone in the beginning, kind of similar to that.
Well, in a kind of manner that in the remake, the girl turns around in the bathroom with a piece of glass, sawing off chunks of her face.
Yeah,
it would have been that. Yeah, it would have been that same kind of style.
So I'm curious, like what is like everyone's like favorite gag? Because we've talked about the scalping scene, we've talked about the cheese grater. Did anyone else like have like a favorite sequence in here?
Stephanie.
Oh, dude, Stephanie was such a good payoff.
Oh yeah, that was pretty great.
Stephanie will save us, and I was like, dude, yes.
And Stephanie kind of did temporarily.
I thought like I liked that sequence. I liked where like Danny like tied Bridget up, and then when she came back to life, like she looked like a ghost, because there's a scene earlier in the film where like Beth and Cassie are talking about ghosts, and that was such a good such a good payoff.
They tied so many aspects of the story and gags and kills to other parts of the story, or even other Evil Dead movies, and won the shining nod that it was awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, that was great.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression, and to get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, Yeah, the elevator scene would probably be up there for me.
I even
I did,
like the whole climax with the abomination. I thought that and the wood chipper.
yeah, like I also like I was gonna bring that up. Like, how did you guys feel about like the fact that like normally like it's we get the sweeping camera throughout like the forest or like the whatever setting it is as kind of like the monster, but this one is like looks like something out of the Thing, where it has like multiple bodies and beings, but like Ellie was at the center of it.
So I'm a gamer, hardcore gamer for years, and spent way too many hours last year playing Elden Ring. And the first thing I thought was they made a grafted scion from Elden Ring, which was just pieces of random people and creatures grafted together into a big monster like that. That was my first thought.
Have you ever
Don't
played
play
the
Elden
game?
Ring.
Have you ever played the indie game Inside, Mark? It was like a little horror, creepy game where
Which one is that?
it's like you're a little boy and you're in a facility running, and these kind of like agents are chasing you, and it tells the story just visually.
No, I
It
haven't.
culminates in a very similar thing where bodies get melded together, and you just reminded me of it.
Yeah, that was my first thought seeing the final demon. Was it reminded me of the grafted scions from Elden Ring.
Yeah, I haven't played Elden Ring, but I bet that's probably sick. I liked it, so I don't want to start a fire here, Mark, because you weren't here on these other episodes, but I'm one of the few people, and we've talked about it at length for an hour on the last episode, where I'm not that hot on the Evil Dead remake. I don't hate it by any means, but I think it's my least favorite out of all of them. And what I said on that episode was that it had a lot of opportunities to do its own thing, but a lot of times it ended up, because it was a remake, kind of pigeonholed to doing the same thing. So the fact that we were talking about it that being a different book, I was excited about that because I was like, oh, it's a different book with different rules. But then they ended up making the rules that it had to kill 5 people in a cabin. So to me, it kind of felt like it was like it had the opportunity to go somewhere different, and then at the last second, because it was a
Like-
remake, it had to go back to the original. And this one, I liked that it felt a little bit more free, and I liked that we had a new book, new rules, and it ended up being the abomination, which was something different than just like we got to lure 5 people to a cabin and kill them, similar to the first one in the remake. But again,
Well-
I'm not trying to start a fight over the Evil Dead 2013 because I know it's
No.
beloved. I know it's beloved. I know I'm crazy, but
So yeah,
Well,
so going back to like, but like allowing it to like not be restricted by those rules brings it back to the original one where it was just unpredictable. You didn't know where it was going to strike.
and the fact that it's a different monster tied to this book than it was in the last one, there was no actual demon that they said it was in the originals. So that in itself made it different.
Yeah.
Plus, they were dealing with a ritual to summon that demon in the remake, which was kind of what they were hinting at in this one, very much more loosely and chaotic. Was certain things needed to happen to summon the abomination, and the abomination possessed the mother, and we got to see it at the end.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to see where they take it with the ability now to spread it to the wild, so to speak, or having the third book show up.
Yeah.
Who's going to
Well-
be in the third book?
Yeah, so I really like one of the things that I think this film does really well is like it feels similar enough but different enough as we've been saying, but like even the Book of the Dead this is probably like my favorite version of the Book of the Dead, to where like it requires a blood sacrifice in order to open. I thought that was such a genius like motive to kind of like bring it forth into the modern age.
Yeah, they did enough to keep it different, but the same at the same time. And it was cool. It was cool to see that instead of trying to use somehow the original Necronomicon from the remake or the one Ash had, whichever they're trying to say this takes place in, although they have said that Ash is in the movie.
Well,
He's-
his voice, right, in the tapes, it's Bruce Campbell. That's something I read that.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
Is that?
It's not him. It's not.
Interesting.
No. It's he's not the main professor. But in the background, at one point, you hear people yelling, and they're like, "Burn it! Burn it! It's the Book of the Dead! It's evil!" Apparently, that's Bruce Campbell. But I don't think it's supposed to be Ash. I think it's just him doing a cameo as
Okay.
a different actor. But I read that on IMDb. Take it for what it is. Anyone can put stuff on IMDb.
Yeah, Bruce Campbell had said, "I'm in the movie. If you could spot me, I'll give you $50."
Oh, okay. And
I
again,
think
I
was
didn't
his
I didn't
exact
spot it
quote.
myself. I read it on the trivia, so I'm not saying I have the ear
Well,
of
that-
the masses.
That might have been it, but yeah, I like the way that was. I think my favorite aspect of the whole thing was that it's a new book and they talk about all three Necronomicons, and we've introduced two of them already. Even if it's a spinoff of an offshoot of either series, you still have two Necronomicons
Yeah.
already there, which means there's a third one. And if it's going like this one went, it's going to be even stronger than this one is. And right now, we don't know how to kill these specific Deadites. They don't die, they just keep moving on.
So I've got some trivia on the subject of Andy's trivia things. So first off, this was we talked about this in the Evil Dead remake, but this one was shot in chronological order, which
Oh, nice. That's
makes
the way.
100% sense because there were 1720 in terms of like 1,720 gallons of fake blood used in this movie.
Oh, so it was less than the last one.
It was
Yeah,
less
but,
than the last
but
one.
to be fair, the last one was
Pretty
the most
gross, yeah.
insane amount of blood I've ever seen in any movie.
And it was all in the Rain of Blood.
So on the Extra Vision podcast, director Lee Cronin revealed a few things. First off, that all the names of the characters in this movie are like nods to previous characters in the Evil Dead franchise. He also said that the name of the building that the movie takes place in is called Modi, which is an anagram of demon. And the pizza place is called Heretta's, which is a reference.
No, it's Henrietta's, which
Henrietta's,
is from
okay,
Evil
yeah.
Dead 2.
Yep. That's all the trivia I have for you.
That's another one too I read that I didn't catch it. I wish I could say I was a big enough fan where I caught it in the moment, but I read that after.
Yeah.
It's they're doing so well with the franchise, and I don't mean to say that big like stupid Uber fan. They're doing so well with the way they do nods to everything else and keep everything tied together, even though some of it's remakes and some of it's not. It's almost like they're showing people the proper way to do some of these movie series.
Well, I think that opens up the question, and where does this rank for you guys in terms? Because I feel like as we've established, like the Evil Dead series is like probably the hardest series that I think we've ever covered on this podcast. That is like hard to rank.
It's the most consistent across the movies.
Yes. Yeah, like you don't have low points like you have with like Scream 3 or like Nightmare 4 or so on and so forth. So like I'm curious to hear where this would like rank for you guys in terms of the series.
Oh God.
It's tough, actually.
That's very tough.
I don't know. They did enough different to make it its own movie while keeping it an Evil Dead. And it's on the same scale of brutality as the remake, but much more brutal than the originals, where the originals leaned into the comedy after the first one and gags and things like that. Like he's kicking his own ass at one point in the cabin in the second one. That's one of the greatest fight scenes ever. It's fantastic. Oh God.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could rank these movies.
It's hard for me. I mean, I've learned on this exploration that I've always been a little bit more into the camp level of an Evil Dead fan as opposed to the true horror level, where Evil Dead 2 to me is the pinnacle of all of this. I think to me it was the perfect one. And then I love Army of Darkness, Ash vs. Evil Dead. I know we don't talk about that on these because we're just going through the movies, but that to me I think is just gold. So 2 and Army of Darkness are my 1 and 2, and then I mean, as a horror fan, it feels blasphemy to not say the first one's number 3, but it's that and this one are kind of tied for me. I really like this one. Because
Yeah,
the
I
first
feel
one
like
I respect, but it's not. I don't watch it that often. Like it's in terms of just like if I turned my brain off and just went in as a casual fan, one, we've talked about it. I wouldn't show it to someone who wasn't a horror fan. I wouldn't show it to
sure.
Masha. It doesn't really have 3 acts. Really, like you have to be into gore and effects and filmmaking. It's really a niche film, and I love it for that. But I don't know. This one was really entertaining, so it's tough. It's
Yeah.
either 3 or 4 for me. It depends on the day.
Yeah, I
So
feel like that's kind of where I am. Like it's gonna depend on like my mood because like I I genuinely love the Evil Dead remake. I love the first film, but like Army of Darkness is like way up there for me also. And like this film, like I feel like this will definitely be like a high enough film in like my 2023 end of year conversation. But like in terms of like the franchise, like it's always gonna depend on the day. It's like, am I in the mood to laugh or am I in the mood to be scared?
so in all fairness to Andy's rating, Evil Dead 2 leaned heavily into what kind of accidentally came out of the first one.
Sure.
And they kind of figured out that, yeah, it was Bruce Campbell did a great job with one-liners and being campy. Let's lean into it for 2. And then Army of Darkness, they're like, you know what? At this point, it's a horror comedy. And they stuck with it. And oh man, yeah, that's hard to rate these. I think as a whole, as a franchise in horror, it's at the top of the list. It's right up there with the Halloweens and Friday the 13th. It's right up there as a franchise. But I think as a whole franchise in movie, I think it's extremely underrated, and I think it's overlooked because it's horror.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
it's had its own influences on like the zombie and possession genres. Um, throughout the decades since it came out. It's influenced lots of other directors and movies and genres throughout the horror history.
yeah. Well, I think that's gonna do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing, talking about Evil Dead Rise. As I've mentioned, we're flipping this, so we're gonna end our Evil Dead series on Evil Dead 2013, and we'll also be doing an epilogue with where it's just gonna be me and Andy. We're gonna be talking about the documentary Hail to the Deadites, which you guys can stream on currently on Shudder. So, Mark, where can people find you online?
I just have my painting on Instagram, but I'm not doing very much right now because of being in the middle of the move. Titanium Juggernaut painting.
All right. Well, Andy, where can people follow you?
You can follow my other podcasts, Love What I Love, wherever podcasts are found, and check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at lwil-podcast.
Yeah, you guys can follow me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can find Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcasts from, and follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Remember that the next time you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.